I'm Angela Pesta, and I'm a UX director at eDreams presently, formerly head of UX at Tesco and at Amazon, working on Kindle. So I'm here today to talk to you guys about experience mapping and evolution. We are designers of experiences. That's a lofty and responsible pursuit. But what is experience insofar as what we do? Our current shared understanding as UX practitioners commonly refers to how one feels when interacting with products and services. These feelings drive behaviors, and if we're successful, advance our desired business and design goals. I argue that it's still early days for our profession. And given our trajectory to date, combined with our steadfast desire to invent and improve, we have massive potential to continue to increase our impact in the world. This becomes illuminated when we look at our practice in the context of human evolution. So with that, let's take a look at the bigger picture for the next 30 minutes, shall we? As it relates to this intangible idea of experience, the philosopher Immanuel Kant once said, "It is beyond a doubt that all our knowledge begins with experience." I find this idea empowering when I apply it to my profession. What it suggests is that as UX practitioners, by way of the creation of these experiences, we are extending new knowledge into the world that otherwise wouldn't be there. This notion can be extended from the individual and applied at a societal level. Humans have common goals, interests, ideas, and thereby common experiences. In aggregate, these experiences and the resulting information contribute to progressive developments, of which we can currently observe and historically observe. Many sociologists and anthropologists have created social theories dealing with social and cultural evolution. Some have declared technological progress to be the primary factor driving the development of human civilization. As UX practitioners, we are agents in advancing this technology. We apply our creative problem-solving techniques and research data to improve and invent products and services that often represent the forefront of technology. In supporting this technological progress, we are in turn supporting the development of human civilization. Accordingly, there is a moral imperative, a pressing duty, to ensure that our designs and corresponding experiences are the best they can be for the benefit of human evolution. The underlying question I ask here is whether we have the right tools befitting our modern design challenges. We no longer live in the industrial age that was once, and in many places still is, focused on speeding up productivity, controlling quality of a given product, and minimizing costs through Six Sigma methods. Rather, we are now more focused on the outcome of producing meaningful value and memorable experiences for enduring customers across an ecosystem of offerings. A trending approach to obtaining these outcomes is to take a broader, more connected, and collaborative approach to problem identification and solving, namely through systems and service design and design thinking techniques. But let us not get ahead of ourselves here. Let us return to the question of tools. What's their significance, and how might they be helpful in supporting us in our mission to advance UX, modern products and services, and society at large? As designers, we are inherent problem solvers, and as such, we need evolved tools to solve emerging design challenges. Indeed, this has been a persistent demand that has increased with time and social demand. If we look back, the earliest suggested use of tools was among the hominin species about 3.4 million years ago. But it wasn't until 2.5 million years ago that we found actual evidence of distinguishable tools, and the first of which was the hand axe. This was effectively the Swiss Army knife or iPhone of the day that served critical survival functions such as digging for tubers and water, chopping wood, striking and butchering prey. Over time, tools helped develop the growth of our brains, and with increased manual labor, we necessarily became more social, evolving as a society. Marshall McLuhan, a philosopher of communication theory, famously said, "We shape our tools, and then our tools shape us." McLuhan was referring to the fact that our social practices co-evolve with the use of new tools and the refinements we make to existing tools. The tool that I'd like to focus on in this talk is one that humans have been building upon for millennia, one that has inspired humans and has been inspired by humans, one whose sophistication has co-evolved with humans, and that is the map. I point to the example of maps in relationship to UX for several learnings. The big picture. Maps have helped millennia of civilization see that big picture, and we need to apply this to UX in a greater way to meet the challenges of current and future needs. Secondly, maps have the power to influence and shape. Maps are authoritative and trusted tools that support decision-making. Maps have a symbiotic evolution. Both the human and the map have informed each other over time, and I'll talk more about this in upcoming slides. And then maps provide discovery and insights. The process of map making brings forth new knowledge, which is shared broadly to support further insight development. When you think about it, the practice of map making, is a remarkable intellectual development in human history. The ability to abstract, simplify, and effectively represent large spanning features in space is a revolution in modes of thinking. Throughout history, maps have played a critical symbiotic role in our cultural evolution. The content and sophistication of maps and map making have progressively advanced with human knowledge and cultural progression. Machiavelli said, "Whoever wishes to foresee the future must consult the past." I say, let us take a brief tour of the history of maps so that we can see how both the human and the map have evolved one another over time. In their most basic form, the first maps came from memory. Mental maps are almost certainly one of the oldest forms of human communication, of which are still in use today. Early hunter-gatherers would have carried maps in their heads of places to find water and migratory animal routes. These were likely used in conjunction with animal tracks and various environmental landmarks that served as guides in their wayfinding. Prominent man-made landmarks were established as early man endeavored to understand the skies with large stone formations like those found at Stonehenge that were believed to mark astronomical events. These pre-language methods of mapping with memory and using natural artifacts as markers were befitting techniques and materials for the cultural demands in that time. Looking at some other examples here, carving on rocks and drawing in caves were other earlier methods in maintaining and communicating ideas, events, and locations. One of the first maps that clearly represents a town plan is a wall painting from around 6,200 BCE. A wall would have been a convenient, ready-made location to place in a social location for a map of a town. This map comes from the prehistoric site of Çatalhöyük in Anatolia. It represents a Neolithic settlement of streets, houses, and a nearby volcano. This was painted well before writing was invented, a whole 2,700 years before cuneiform writing. Indeed, this speaks to the visceral and immediate communicative nature of maps. Another early map is the clay tablet, used during the Babylonian period. This one hails from Nippur, the capital of Sumeria, about 1500 BCE. It shows the river Euphrates, a temple, and fields with lines to indicate boundaries of the estates of wealthy individuals separated by irrigation channels. For an area that would have experienced constant flooding, clay would have been a resilient material. The map's communicative content supported the growing need of clarifying public and private spaces, gardens, resources, and building plans as long-term settlements and organized communities became more developed. Around the same time period, Egyptians painted long vignettes on tomb walls and on scrolls of papyrus that were placed in coffins. These vignettes comprised the Book of the Dead, a funerary text of magic spells. It portrayed the deceased and their long, arduous journey after death through the underworld and into the afterlife. These Book of the Dead spells were quite possibly the first journey maps. The impetus for these maps is supported by the religious beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. And the medium of the tomb walls and scrolls were perfect for capturing the wide format of the maps. In the 1st century, maps leaped forward with Claudius Ptolemy's coordinate system of longitude and latitude, and with the introduction of projections, which it translated the spherical Earth to a flat surface. This progress in map making reflected the progress of science and maths that dominated Greek culture of the time. But it would be more than a millennium after the Middle Ages until these concepts would come to further evolve maps, such as the case with Portolian charts, which were used to navigate the Mediterranean Sea. During the Middle Ages, the Roman Church dominated, and so did the TNO map, which represented the Earth in a circle with Europe, Africa, and Asia in its different quadrants. Its geographical information took influence from the Bible and was oriented with east at the top and with Jerusalem at the center. This so-called Mappa Mundi was from 1285, and it's the largest medieval map to exist, and it can be seen at the Hereford Cathedral. Interestingly, these maps, they were never meant to be used for navigation, but rather they were intended as diagrams for classical learning. With the advent of the modern printing press in 1440 and the commercialization of maps, maps became democratized, no longer exclusive to the elite, a power shift in the control of map making. Starting in the 16th century, there was an emergent interest in understanding topography, the shape of the land represented in maps. This interest came about with the emergence of national governments and their interest in understanding the extent of kingdoms for the purposes of taxation, scientific interest in mineral mining, and military understanding of terrain for the movement of artillery and troops. As a result, detailed measurement became part of the mapping process, while land surveying mathematics advanced with the use of trigonometry. We can see the slope lines represented with parallel lines called hachures. They denoted steepness and direction of slopes. Ultimately, contour lines were adopted as the standard for mapping topography. As we can see through these examples, maps grew in their communicative sophistication as the demands of the culture's needs evolved. Gradually, data gathering for maps extended beyond geography to include other types of data, including climate, biology, social, and cultural data. These maps, originally called special maps or statistical maps, became known as thematic maps. A popular example that really exemplifies the power of maps, which some of you might know this example already. It happened to jumpstart GIS. It was that from a British physician whose name was John Snow in 1854. He mapped, what he did was, he was prompted by a large outbreak of cholera, and it was believed that it was actually spread through the air, but he actually had the theory that it was spread through water. And so he went out to prove this theory and went door to door of where there were deaths and correlated those with the nearby wells. And he came to find that it actually centered on this one particular well that's now at the corner of Broderick and Lexington Street. Despite skepticism from local authorities, he had the pump handle removed and the outbreak quickly subsided. So while topography and theme were already in place, what was so novel about Snow's technique was how he analyzed clusters of geographically dependent phenomena. Moving along in our timeline, we see that technology and social progress continue to be key themes in the accelerated growth of cartography. In the 19th and 20th centuries, new types of maps emerged, along with the technology of the day, including road maps for carriages and soon-to-come cars, railroad maps for the proliferation of railways, aeronautical charts for aircraft, transit maps for modern city life. The list goes on. Then we have the advent of the personal computer, the internet, the use of space satellites, the development of global positioning systems and geographic information systems, which revolutionized cartography. GIS capture, store, manipulate, analyze, manage, and display spatial data or geographical data. It's the underlying technology that supports web mapping products like Bing Maps or Google Maps. And they offer APIs that enable any developer to create their own mashups that range from helping you track your jogging to identifying when the sun will provide the best shot for your photo of Half Dome in Yosemite. Crowdsourcing maps is yet another modern mapping phenomenon that speaks to the further democratization of mapping, and we can see that in projects like OpenStreetMap, where anyone can collaborate on a map. So the character and technology of map making may have changed over the centuries, but the potential of maps has not. Maps embody a perspective which is known, and a perception of that which may be worth knowing. As we've seen through these examples, the importance of the map as a tool to understand and represent has been longstanding, and it continues to grow. As we move forward, this nature of this vital linkage, its reciprocal relationship to us, is one that shapes the other. There is us humans with our technological and cultural demands, and then there are maps with their discovery-related insights. Both propel the other. As Ray Kurzweil says, technology goes beyond mere tool making. It is a process of creating ever more technology using the tools from the previous round of innovation. While maps have predominantly been a tool for geographical purposes, the practice of mapping is increasingly spanning well beyond the geographic. The notion of a map and mapping itself is loosening up and serves as a base metaphor for any spatial visualization. Indeed, mapping is a metaphor many fields of study have embraced, including neuroscience with brain mapping, genetics with gene mapping, astronomy with mapping the universe, and of course our very own field of user experience. As you know, there are many forms of maps that have become tools of the UX practice. We have mind maps, journey maps, experience maps, service blueprints, offering maps, system maps, actor maps, and service ecology maps, to name a handful. But from where did these maps evolve, and for what reasons? There are, and sorry, I'm actually going to take a look at the service design blueprint. I think that's of interest, and I'd like to focus on that. Where does it come from? It goes back to the early 1900s, when scientific management was introduced by Frederick Taylor, who, along with his peers, sought to analyze and synthesize industrial production workflows to increase economic efficiency and productivity for labor. Here you can see stills from a time motion study. This was done by Frank Galbraith, of which helped identify efficiencies in work streams through direct observation. It goes back to various methods and tools, including flowcharts, of which Frank Galbraith created. This is a graphical and symbolic representation of processes used to record actions and decisions to get accurate descriptions of the process, used to analyze the steps in a process to help eliminate waste, thus supporting efficiency planning. There was the Gantt chart that was introduced by Henry Gantt around the same time, which is a bar chart that typically illustrates a project schedule, its tasks, start points, and dependencies. At the time, this was considered revolutionary, and it still persists to be an important management tool today. These methods from the operations side of service management inspired the idea of the service blueprint. The first service blueprint was introduced in a 1982 Harvard Business Review by Lynn Shostak, a vice president of in banking at the time, of marketing and managing. And this article, Shostak's example of a blueprint, was a very simple one. What she says here is that the service blueprint is a visual definition of a service process. It displays each sub-process in the service system, linking the various steps in the sequence in which they appear. A service blueprint is essentially a detailed map or flowchart of the service process. So her blueprint, it was a very simple one that mapped a shoe shine service. The novelty of the blueprint was in illustrating the customer journey and mapping that to the supporting processes of the given service through the line of visibility. As Shostak articulated, it was more precise than verbal definitions, and it could help solve problems preemptively while identifying failure points in a service operation. Just as companies have evolved to become more customer-focused, so too has service blueprinting. The idea of the stage emerged to distinguish front stage and backstage activities. Supporting processes and the internal line of interaction were added, as well as physical evidence. The current state is that there are many variations of service blueprints, journey maps, and UX maps overall. There are no concrete, standardized templates or tools separate from the loosely held conventions and best practices that we have. I think that's a good thing. I believe our UX tools need to be flexible and free from rigid rules in order to adapt to the unique problem-solving needs that are themselves ever-changing. The map maker should have the freedom, and dare I say, take the responsibility to advance new conventions in UX maps as best suits the needs of their project and audience. That means that we have to be willing to embrace the ambiguity that exists around UX mapping. When my team and I at Tesco set out to map the journey of Club Card's registration process, a dormant 20-year-old multi-channel process, we were challenged by the complexity of the task. The large number of touch points, scenarios, nuances, and pain points all seemed to increase the closer that we looked. We grappled with how we would simplify it to fit the standard journey map model. The learning was in the vagueness, in the doubt and tireless attempt to resolve a simple representation of a very multifaceted experience to a host of differing audience interests. In the end, there was no single magic map, but rather several maps of varying degrees of detail, including stickies-based maps to start, flowcharts of processes, and finally high-level use case-based maps. And then we even had maps that mapped how issues were related to one another. Of course, there were research artifacts that supported the mapping effort, including usability research, videos, cognitive walkthroughs, analytics, statistics, and more. But the point is, we had to feel our way through the process and really do what we thought was right for our project needs. While the maps themselves, they were a valuable tool and a valuable body of evidence for many on the team, what ended up being very successful for us was the simplified list of boiled down issues. And that actually it resulted from the process of map making. And it was useful when communicating with the executives. It was a quick reference that could easily support a conversation about how the issues would be addressed. Each issue was prioritized by measuring business impact, customer severity, and technical complexity. Our success in this overall persuasive mapping effort was the product of research and analysis to arrive at a trustworthy and authoritative big picture view. Maps empower and embody, they exude power. They are both reactive and proactive. They have the ability to represent large systems and do so in a visceral, narrative-like, and persuasive manner while providing deep insights. I've decided to focus on them today because I believe the power of maps is needed more than ever in our field, particularly when you consider the accelerating trajectory of growth. We have transitioned into a very interesting period of time in the timeline of humanity that so happens to put UXers in a seat that is both dutiful and powerful. Let us take a brief look at some emerging trends in UX that, for me, beg the need for broad-minded, map-inspired problem-solving approaches. Firstly, the rate of technological growth is increasing exponentially. And we can see that here with the rate of inventions. The world is becoming ever more connected as an internet-based society. And to truly be effective, we need to understand how the parts interrelate and make up the whole. Competition is increasing with disruption as the new trend. Customers, they continuously expect better, more gratifying, and memorable experiences. This drives perpetual demand in product and service design. Collaborative design thinking methods are becoming more widely adopted, changing how ideas are generated and how decisions are made. And then lastly, customers are moving to the center of more and more companies' business models, thereby raising the importance of the role of UX. All of these trends are a giant call to action for me as I realize my potential in an incredibly receptive workplace and demanding market. I see my role as an agent in the progress of humanity. I believe that by shaping products and service experiences with our tools and insights, we affect emotions and behaviors and drive customer demand. In aggregate, this demand impacts the advancement of technology and cultures. And so, it is critical to better understand the nature of experiences if we are to positively advance trends and have a desirable evolutionary impact. Experience, as was mentioned at the start of this talk, is hard to put your finger on. It's phenomenal, constructed in the mind, a thing in itself, subjective to the experiencer. As UX practitioners, we seek to make it richer, more emotional, gratifying, and memorable. Unlike traditional mapmaking, the nature of mapmaking experiences doesn't have a concrete location in space or time. This is how we, as UX practitioners, are evolving the practice of mapping. And so this is why we need to evolve our tools to better understand the nature of experience and how we can successfully design for it. A perpetual question we should ask ourselves is, how do we evolve our UX tools? I leave it to you all to discuss further amongst yourselves, but first I offer a few ideas of my own. We should learn from what's been done before. Identify trends and trajectories, similar to what we've done here today by looking at maps in history. Stay connected. Stay abreast of technological and cultural trends, and recognize your role in the system of evolution. Share. Be more open source with maps that you create. Share with the UX community, learn from others, collaborate, and leverage design thinking activities. Adapt and influence. Embrace the ambiguity and lack of guidelines. Be inventive and push for results in your companies with that representative big picture view. And so I turn it over to you. Thank you.